we further the presentation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land on which we are meeting. The beauty of this is we're now meeting online, which means you could be anywhere. So I like to acknowledge all the traditional custodian on wherever you are. And I want to pay my respect to the elders past and present, and extended respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But in an online sense, I would like to extend my respect to all First people wherever you are. So that's my acknowledgement of country. So now a little bit about myself. So some of you might have listened to my presentation in the past, so you can just skip this. Now it's easier, it's online. If you're watching a replay, you can just fast forward. For those of you who doesn't know who I am, the reason that I'm doing this is mainly because you might be curious, like, why am I talking about death and dying? So first of all, I'm actually was born in Malaysia. My hometown's name is Ipoh, and it's very famous with beautiful limestone caves, which you can see one of the pictures over there. So it's a valley surrounded by mountains. Every time when I do a presentation, I include this picture when I was actually 7 years old. Yes, I was 7 years old. I actually went and attended my first public speech competition, which halfway through the speech, I forgot what I was supposed to say. So I always put the picture up. That is to remind myself that, you can say humble beginnings, that once upon a time, I'm this little boy that is so fearful that I can't finish the script that I memorized. And now I'm actually talking to a computer, trying to think that I'm actually talking to you. So this is just a reminder to myself, but also hopefully an encouragement for anyone out there that you might have something that you're really fearful about. I do believe with the right intention, with the right support and the right instruments, hopefully you can overcome whatever you want to overcome. So that's a bit about where I came from. When I was in my 20s, I actually went and studied at Kaohsiung Medical University, which is this lovely building, and that's where I finished my medical degree. While I was studying in medicine, death and dying is one thing that really, really fascinates me. It fascinates me so much that my medical degree, I actually went to Nanhua University and did my master degree in life and death studies. So Nanhua University actually has a really close relationship with the organizer of this online Buddha's birthday, because Kwong Chan is the organization that founded Nanhua University. And the founder of Kwong Chan, Reverend Master Xing Yun, at the very beginning of the university, he actually decided not to collect any tuition fees. And that's why I was able to finish my master degree straight out of my internship, not working, relying on scholarship, and did my master degree in life and death studies. So my research back then is about vocational high school students and their need in death awareness education. So that's how I just, how should I say that? I'm passionate about death and dying, and the life and death studies allows me to actually further explore all the topics that's in this area. So after that, I became a writer and a public speaker. And because I think, I believe that you need to have a PhD for people to listen to you. So I actually then started my PhD with Griffith University in the year 2004. While I was at Griffith, I started working in the School of Medicine. As you can see up there, those were my students. And then the one below, that's actually my colleagues. So, so I work at the medical school now for about 13 years. And what I work on is to train the medical students how to be professional communicators. At the same time, we also do a lot of training in preparing them to become clinicians. So I'll talk more about that later. So like I said, during that time, I became a public speaker and a writer. There's a few slides about me and my books on death and dying. That is my fourth book that I wrote at the end, published at the end of 2018. And this is my 5th book that was published end of last year. They're all about death and dying and what I think about death and dying and what we can learn from contemplating on death and dying. So this is one of my book launches, and this one is in Singapore. So wherever I go, I try my best to bring people's awareness to how to live with the fact that our mortality is a real thing, which actually relates to today's theme of the. So now, this part is about what I'm trying to talk about in this presentation. So we're now 6 minutes and 23 seconds in, so we still have 53 minutes to finish what we want to cover. So I'd like to introduce you to contemplative pedagogy, which is a way of teaching, a pedagogy based on contemplative tools, contemplative approach. So using contemplative pedagogy, my teaching team designed this approach called MARIS, which is mindfulness, impactive experience, affective reflection, and a supportive learning environment. So in the medical school, like I said earlier, our education is to prepare our students to become doctors. You might start thinking that, oh, why am I listening to this talk? I don't want to be a medical doctor. Well, just bear with me, because I personally believe whatever we teach the medical students actually should be taught to everyone. And this pandemic is actually a really good example why it is. So imagine the way that we would design the curriculum is to make sure that our student is prepared to deal with whatever impact they have in the clinical world, which is, life and death. We try to give them a head start so that when they start working clinically, at least they know how to continue to build their ability. What's happening with the pandemic is suddenly not just the doctors and the healthcare workers is now facing with death and dying. The whole world is facing it in a really big time, which means death and dying is occurring more frequently and is more in front of our mind. Okay, so back to MARIS, which is our teaching model. What we do in classroom is we introduce impactive experience to our medical students. Before we do that, we actually build their ability to be mindful and present. So when they receive the impactive experience, they can then effectively reflect on how they feel, what is the emotion. And all of this is done in a safe and supportive environment. So if you flipped it around to outside of the classroom now in reality, COVID-19 is an impactive experience where the whole world is facing now. The big question is, how mindful are we being in this pandemic? The other question is, during this pandemic, we're still in it, how much awareness do we have of how it's impacting ourselves? I'm not talking just about the external impact. I'm also talking about internal impact. How are we managing our emotion? How are we managing our mental health? How are we doing all this during this period? And amongst of all that, do we have our usual support network to make this experience as supportive, as safe as possible? So hopefully by now, I'm able to lay it out for you why a teaching model in the medical school is actually helpful for us to use to manage the pandemic, and hopefully create this opportunity for us to reflect on what is going on, and then what are the changes and differences that we want to do down the track, which relates to the presentation, life, death, pandemic, who we were, and what we will be. So this is where I'm coming from. So before we launch into any more content, in my presentation, I actually have a deliberate pause like this because I think we live in an era where there is so much information out there. It's actually really, really important to have those moments. So every now and then I have a picture like this that you can just take a deep breath. The good thing is you're listening to this online. You should be at home. I hope that you're comfortable, which means you do not have to worry about anything else but be present with this presentation, and hopefully you find that it will be useful. So just take a deep breath and be present to what's going on now. So what's happening in your mind, how are you feeling in your body, okay, and then we will continue the presentation. So it's 11 minutes now, that means it will finish in 49 minutes. So yes, unfortunately, we didn't have the best start to 2020. At the end of 2019, we have this horrible bushfire, which burned 25 million acres of land. You can see in the satellite picture over there that it's just horrific to look at. And then at the end of last year, around December, COVID-19 started spreading. And now if we just look at the number there, I think it's like 3.9 million people that's being diagnosed. So it's nearly 4 million. Let me do a quick count. Yes, it's nearly 4 million. I got this information this morning on the 8th of May. So probably by the time you watch this, it will be way past 4 million people, which is really, really dreadful. And many, many deaths has occurred. So this is the situation that we're being dealt with. So both the bushfire and the pandemic, if you put that into the Marist education model, they're both impactive experience. So when we're faced with impactive experience, what can we do? What can we learn? How can we be different after this? So yes, there you go. This is the shocking number again. This one is a bit lower. It's 3.7 million. And then you got 265,000 deaths. So this is the reality that we live with. That's two things about this particular slide. For some people, they get so impacted and overwhelmed by it, and those people need to really look after their own well-being. For some people, they might be so numbed about it because it's been happening for 2 months now. Like it's been over 100 days since Australia have its first COVID-19 case. So because it's been happening for more than 3 months since the first case, it's very easy for us to just not be as engaged. So I think it's very important for us to stay present but not be overwhelmed. So this is where the mindfulness comes in, that you are still present, but you're not overwhelmed, you're not disconnected. And what the outcome we would like to be is, what can we do so that we can be part of the solution or be part of the building once we are out on the other side. I love this picture because this is a picture taken after bushfire. So you can see that the bushfire has devastated the whole landscape. Everything is black and charcoal, but you got these little green shoots coming out, which means that nature has the ability, the amazing ability to heal and grow again. But when we look at this picture, we really need to take everything in. As much as we like to focus on the hope, the growth, the beauty, it's also still very, very important to be present to the heartbreaks, to the devastation. Again, this is a mindful present scenario, that how can you mindfully be present that we are, some countries are still going through this horrific process. We are very lucky in Australia that we have flattened the curve, and the government is talking about how can we move back to the new normal. We now have 3 stages laid out in front of us, and if we're lucky, maybe in July things will go back to normal. Having said that, again, we can't forget what we had experienced. We bring them with us along with the hope. So it's about this balancing act of having both at the same time. So I wonder what's happening with your thoughts now, because we just talked about the bushfire, we talked about the pandemic. it's now another moment to just take a pause and just to take it in, like, okay, we're now in the middle of this. There are definitely people that's more impacted by it. Imagine if you just came out of the bushfire and then now going straight into COVID-19. It is just beyond my imagination how hard that would be. So let's just be present with all those things. And for some people, they might find the experience in some way, they can see the silver lining. It's just important for us to know that everyone is experiencing it. Everyone is coming out with something different. So the big question, who we were before COVID-19. I mean, I don't have an answer to that because you know who you were. I know who I was. But that was 3 months ago. It's still important to take that moment to just reflect. 3 months, 100 days when we had our first case, and what happened, what was life like before that. And now, like for me, it's the end of my 8th week working from home. So it's more than 60 days, nearly 60 days of working from home. If you ask me immediately, just thinking about working from home, it's just that I never thought that going to work is something that I would not be able to do for such a long time. I might be on a holiday, I might be traveling, but I've never thought that I would be away from my office or my workplace for 8 weeks. It's a very long time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the things that we had before the pandemic, there's so much of it that now we reflect on, or me personally reflecting on it, is just so precious. We take it for granted. And unfortunately, we have to slowly make our way back to that. So just take that moment to contemplate life before the pandemic. Okay. So now that we're in the middle of it or starting to see the end of it, the important question is, how are things going for you? It's very, very important for us to constantly look after ourselves. For me personally, it's been very, very stressful. And you might say, but you're smiling, you're smiling as if nothing's. No, life is very stressful. The beauty of being a Buddhist, because this is a Buddha's birthday talk, the beauty of being a Buddhist is not that you are immune to the challenges of life. If I am to say we are in any way lucky or privileged, is that in the Buddhist teaching, we are being made fully aware that the world is impermanent, full of changes. And whenever huge changes occur, as a Buddhist, it's a good opportunity for us to implement our practice so that we can be present with the changes and be mindful of our internal being or internal world. Like when I'm faced with the pandemic, when I'm faced with the stress as an academic, having to move all my teaching online, when I'm stressed with the environment and the people around me, friends, families, people who lose their job, all this impact. It's as if that all these things are happening, but then at the same time, there's this part of me internally, because of what I have been practicing or what I'm aware of, that is able to somehow, hopefully, maybe not most of the time, but hopefully anchor me so that I'm able to be present to the experience and yet not totally being overwhelmed by it. So this is a very good question to ask yourself, like, how are things going? In a normal everyday life, we might just walk by saying, yeah, everything is okay. But it's very hard to be okay at this time with what's happening. So having that awareness, being present, is ultra important, because if you're not aware that you're stressed, then you might not think of seeking help in some way that is going to be really counterproductive. So being present about yourself, you could literally start your day by being honest and say, okay, I'm feeling really stressed today, or I'm feeling really grumpy today, or I'm feeling this or that or whatever, because of all the things that's happening around you. Having that, being present to that, would actually help you to travel along the day, so that if you feel like you wanted to explode, you know that, okay, I've started the day in this way because of what's going on. So this is about checking in with you. How are things going? So during this pandemic, there's a few things that I like to share with you. Okay, this is more of like my own thoughts, things that I've seen, things that I've thought about. The first thing, I describe this pandemic as a storm. Every now and then you hear that, we're on the same boat, making this work. That is a metaphor that would work if you define that clearly. I would actually say that we are in the same storm, but we're not on the same boat. Why? Because fortunately for me, as a medical educator, working in a university, teaching future doctors, my work is comparatively more secure to other people. If you work in a restaurant, if you work in arts, if you work in entertainment, this coronavirus pandemic is an utter nightmare. Okay, so we're facing the same storm, but we have to be very mindful that we're on different boats. Because we're on different boats, this is a great opportunity for us to practice empathy towards each other. As a country, Australia, everyone in Australia can practice collective empathy towards other countries, because Australia is one of the few lucky countries, like our neighbor New Zealand and other places, that we have such a low number of cases, and mortality rate is so low. Okay, so it's very important. It's an important opportunity for the nation to reflect on that and say, okay, how present are we to the suffering of other people? How do we look at what is going on around us? When we're looking at what is happening around us, how much empathy are we able to practice? How judgmental are we? What is going on? This is actually a great opportunity of practice, because you don't get a pandemic that often. Hopefully that's not another one anytime soon. While you're in the thick of it, this is the opportunity to reflect. Everyone as a nation, luckily, our numbers are so low. How do we empathize with people around us? When we see countries with really, really high numbers, yes, we might have an emotional reaction. Amongst all that, are we totally judgmental? Are we able to be compassionately empathizing with them? Now, if we put back to our country in Australia, I say it again, we are in the same storm, but we're on different boats. For people who are in the bigger boats, again, this is another opportunity for us, for you, to practice empathy, because people around us could be in smaller boats, and some people could probably literally have no boat and just hanging on a floating wood or a floating item. When I think about that, I would honestly think that majority of the people that is watching this presentation now, I think you're comparatively lucky that amongst everything, you can find a time on a Saturday or whenever you're watching this to be able to listen to a presentation like this. Those people who really need it probably won't even have the resources, the setup, the Wi-Fi or the broadband to do this. So being present to that is very important. Hence, this is my first point. This pandemic is a really, really rare opportunity for us to deepen our practice of empathy and care. But when we are doing that, it's also very important to talk about self-care, because you might have a lot of empathy to other people to the extent that you sympathize with them, and you might drown and overwhelmed by what they're experiencing. So keeping that healthy boundary is important so that you can continue to support other people. There is no point if you drown yourself and overwhelm yourself in the whole situation to the state that you are actually not able to offer any support to people around you. All of that is so easier said than done. It all needs to be done in your everyday practice. Like, for instance, this is the second time I'm recording this presentation. Why? Because when I did the presentation earlier today, something happened at work and I got totally distracted. The good thing is I have enough mindful presence in me to know that I have to stop recording. Instead, I did not just press on after I have to manage what's happening at work. I was able to think like, okay, no, I need to stop. And when I came back to do this again, I actually decided to do it from the very beginning so that I can keep the flow. So I actually chucked away the first half of the presentation and re-recorded that. So this is actually, for me, another example of how do we practice what we know? How do we implement the things that we know that is the right way to do it? And how do we find enough inner strength, enough awareness, and enough determination to stick to doing what you think is right and proper way to do it? So anyway, we learn so much from what's happening. And for me, the understanding of we are in the same storm but not the same boat is really a light bulb moment. So now the second thing that I like to talk about is, so we all learned something, but what do you want to do about it? So that is a big question. But before you answer that question, the one thing that we need to then think about is, are we actually clear about what we learned? Did we consolidate it? Did we do something to record it? Did we write it down? Did we reflect on it? Did we really distill the experience and allow it to become something? For example, about 20 days ago, I started this activity in this book. So what I did is every day I drew a little monk. So this is day 1, and then this is day 2. So I've been doing it for 20 days now. So like yesterday, according to the Theravadan tradition, it's the Buddha's birthday and enlightenment day and the day that he passed away, all in one. So we celebrate that by bathing the Buddha, and this is what I drew. So that's a dragon, 7 water coming down from the sky, and then the little Buddha that's being bathed. And today is day number 20 for me. This is what I drew today. So I think what I'm trying to say is, what happens now for me is that at the end of all this, I think I'll keep doing it until we reach stage 3 of the government's plan, where we go back to normal life. Hopefully, I don't have to do it for too long, but I have another 2 drawing books to go with. I hope I will be somewhere out there when I'm in the middle of this one and not finishing all of them. So for me, what happens is, at the end of all this, I will have a collection of all these lovely drawings, and every one of them would remind me something about what was happening at that moment, why I drew that. And that is something that I can carry with me and bring with me to move forward. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, How reflective are you? How contemplative are you? Are you able to spend some time to capture those reflections in whatever ways that you want? You can draw, you can journal, you can do it in a piece of artwork, whatever works for you. The important thing is to capture it. So now, if you capture it, of course, you want to continue the good things. Like, for instance, I started some of my own habits myself. What I try to do every day, not successfully every time, but most of the time, every day, what I try to do is to get up early and do some simple exercise. For me, this is a big deal because I am someone that doesn't exercise normally. But this is what I did during this pandemic period, being at home for 8 weeks. So what am I going to do about that? When life goes back into normal, how am I going to sustain whatever that I built? So that's why this sentence, I have the intention to keep doing, but will I be able to do that? What am I going to put in place to allow that to continue to happen? If you were to ask me, I think again, this will come back to being present and contemplate about that experience. Because if you fundamentally realize whatever good habit that you have cultivated during this period, and however it's impacting on your body and your mind and your spirit, if you're able to really be present to that, hopefully that is enough in there to motivate you to continue doing that. If you're not able to, that is fine. We are human. We do New Year resolution every year and we rarely follow it through. That is part of the human nature. So you might have a post-pandemic resolution. If you're not able to keep going, please remember one thing. Do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can always go back and start again. You have already had that experience. You've already done that for a period of time. You can always just go back and press the start button and do it again. So I guess these are the 3 things that I want to share with you with this particular slides. That things to think about a bit, what you learned from the pandemic, how do you consolidate that, what are your plans to carry it forward, how do you keep doing things that you find helpful that you have created or you've learned during this period of time. On that note, I still can't help not saying this, what I'm going to say, which is what I've said just now are still aiming at those people who have the ability and space to actually contemplate during this chaotic, horrific time. There is a lot other people out there who won't have that space. Imagine that you lose your job overnight. There's all these bills that you need to pay. You do not have much savings in your bank. You have to draw out superannuation. You have to homeschool your kid. You get the job keepers, but your boss is expecting you to work more hours because he thinks that if you do not work the hours, you do not deserve that amount of money. Life is really, really challenging for a lot of people, for a lot of Australians. And I can't stress enough that we have to be present to that. We have to cut each other some slacks, especially those of us who have the ability to. We really need to do that. And for those of you who are struggling, and if you happen to come across this presentation, I really want you to know that there are resources out there that might not be as much as you wished. The key thing is you do have to reach out. You do have to reach out to make things happen. I know it's a big ask. It's very difficult. If you lost your job, you're not having enough sleep, you have so much worries, and you still have to go through the paperwork or call someone to ask for help. Yes, that is very challenging, but please try to make contact. so that people around you know what you're going through, and maybe they're able to help you. And again, for those of us who are able to help, this is the time for us to reach out, to check on people, to see how they are, and see whatever we can do for them. So that's my thoughts about this slide. So this particular slide is just a revisit of the Maris model. And as I said, it's not just for medical students, it's actually for everyday life. When we have an impactive experience, how mindful present we are we able to reflect on the affective outcome of it? And are we able to do that or create this supportive environment for us to experience that experience? So now, how are you going internally? Do you have some thoughts that you want to write down? Or is this time for you to pause this presentation or just, move on to something else? Because I've been blabbering at you for 36 minutes. Whatever works, whatever you need. Just always give yourself that moment to just pause. Be present and see where it goes from here. For me, I have to move on because we still have another 25 minutes before then this presentation. So now this is the part of my presentation when I talk a bit more about my journey and experience supporting my mum with her lung cancer. So my mum is the lady in blue. Those were her relatives. And so she was diagnosed with lung cancer about 4+ years ago. And those are the process that we went through. So this is when during one of the checkup, after the checkup, I try to do something good, nice, enjoyable with her after medical checkup. So we went and saw a movie. It was Jungle Book, and there was actually no one in the cinema, so it's just two of us. Mom actually classified that as one of her best moment in life. The fact that she has the whole cinema to herself. So this one is the day of the operation, which is 4 years ago. And so mom was saying goodbye to sis because I'm the one that was driving her to the hospital. Before we get to the hospital, we stopped by at Kwong Chan Temple. Kwong Chan Temple is at Underwood. It's a beautiful place. You should go and visit if you have time to. So she went to the temple to pray. We were really lucky that the then abbess was in the temple, so she actually came and have a chat with my mother. So we have a new abbess now, Abbess Man Wang, and she's very personable. So if you have opportunity, you should go to the temple and have a visit. So there was her at the hospital preparing the night before operation. This is the day of the operation, the picture that we took before she went to the theater. This is the picture inside the preparation room before she goes under. So just to give you guys some perspective, my mum would be 79 years old then. So we do not know what's going to happen with the operation. We do not know whether there's going to be any side effects, anything of that sort. I guess what I'm trying to say is, for people who have experienced cancer or have had family members with cancer, impermanence and death and dying is a constant theme in our world. And this time, during this pandemic, this theme has been amplified to everyone. But for those of us who have been going on similar journey, this pandemic is almost like something that we are familiar with. Not totally familiar, but what its impact on us, it's something that we're familiar with, which is life is impermanent. Things are impermanent. Things can change very drastically. You pretty much have to live every day not quite knowing what is going to happen tomorrow, but yet hope for the best, expect the worst, hope for the best, and keep doing that balancing act. So I still remember the moment when I saw this picture, because this is the picture that's being sent by my sis who was in the preparation room with my mother. I thought, this could be the last time I saw her, but it is what it is. So luckily, she survived. That's her at the recovery room after the operation. The next day, you can see that she's obviously much better, recovering in her room out of the ICU. But unfortunately, the next day, she had an episode of speed up heart rate. So she got sent into the cardiac CCU, cardiac care unit, which was a scare for all of us. But then she recovers again, got discharged. This is her in her follow-up appointment. And then, of course, every few months we have to do checkups. And around the time point, about 1+ year, we discovered that's other tumor in the other side of her lungs. So she has to receive radiotherapy. So that's her at the radiotherapy appointment. That's mum at the radiotherapy machine. So radiotherapy went on, and she had a reaction. So that's her whole body flaring up. She got hospitalized. The whole face was swollen up. She recovered, and this is her on being discharged. And that's a picture that we took recently when she went back for one of her checkups. So we're now monitoring other potential tumors in her, and there might be other treatment that we have to engage. So what I'm trying to say is, it's been a journey of 4.5 years, and there is 4.5 years of uncertainty, hope, disappointment, worries, scared, sadness. It's a huge mixed bag of emotion. And I have to say, as a thanatologist, someone who does research in life and death studies, this 4.5 years is a really good opportunity for me to apply what I have learned. And hence, when we were faced with this pandemic, I personally felt that there is more tools in my bags that I could use when we realized that, okay, our movement is now being limited. We have to stay home most of the time. We have to start to learn new skills to deliver my work online. So all those are uncertainties, they are challenges, they are things that we're not familiar with. You don't quite know what's happening. Is being present to that. Funny enough, that is what we teach our medical students. We teach our medical students to cope with uncertainties. And again, this is something that we should have taught everyone. We should have taught everyone in school about managing uncertainty, being familiar with your emotion, having the ability to be creative, to be flexible, to learn new things, and to apply, to seek help, and teamwork. So I think we teach a lot of that, but I think we're lacking in the teaching of dealing with uncertainties, dealing with death and dying, dealing with huge impacts in life. So this whole pandemic is actually an opportunity for us to learn and grow from that, if we have that space. I keep thinking that it's very, very important for us to never lose track that a lot of people are still suffering this pandemic. A lot of people's life, family could be destroyed, career being destroyed in this pandemic. It's very important to be present to that. I have another little story. We're almost running out of time. We've got another 16 minutes left. At the end of the 90s, my family was hit by the stock market crash at the end of the 90s. My father lost everything. And I was under the impression that I nearly can't afford to finish my medical degree. Lucky enough, my sister, who's in this picture, she arrived with money for help to help me finish my medical degree and then my master's degree. So me personally, I have had experience when there is a huge incident like the global financial crisis that just happened about 10 years ago, how it impacts on people's life. So it's very important for us to be present that everyone's impact is different, even though we're in the same storm, but we're not on the same boat. So be present to other people's struggle. I think that's all I'm trying to say again and again and again. So I think on reflection, very lucky. This is me and my siblings and my mom and my dad. I think our religious belief, being a Buddhist, helped a lot because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, one of the core teaching of Buddhism is about impermanence. And the whole practice of Buddhism is about how do you cultivate the wisdom to be aware of the impermanence, to understand the impermanence, but and at the same time have compassion to engage in this world and to make a difference. It's not because it's impermanence, then you just give up and not do anything. It's because of the impermanence you see the opportunity. You see that there is room for creativity, for flexibility, for things to happen. So I think that kind of philosophy and way of life really helped us through this pandemic. So now another moment of pause before I finish the rest of the presentation in just under 14 minutes. Where are you at now? What are the things that you've listened that might give you a bit more insight? What are you going to do about it? Be present to that. After the presentation, you might want to write something down. You might want to draw something. You might want to make a plan. So just have that moment. What's happening? Even just for 20 seconds. Then we can move on to the next part of the slide, or the remaining parts of the slide. So now I'd like to share with you what one of the palliative care nurse, Bronnie Ware, learned from her patient who were dying. So this is the top 5 regrets of dying patients collected by her. When we look at the top 5 regrets and putting it in the context of the pandemic, it's almost like the things that we definitely need to do, and hopefully this pandemic allows you to think about that too. So what are the top 5 regrets of dying patients? Let's do it. The first one, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of us. So apparently a lot of dying patients regrets on that. Now, in this pandemic, I think it's important for us to contemplate on this question too. For the past, however long time that your movement has been limited. For me, I said I've been working from home for 8 weeks now. So that's 50 over days for me to think about, am I living a life true to myself? Is it what I'm doing just because it's expected of me or other people? So it's important to have that kind of awareness and thoughts. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Well, that for me, that's a challenge, because like, what's the time now? It's 11:20 at night. I should go to bed, but I'm still doing this presentation. I suppose because I really enjoy this, so this is not work, but this is what workaholic says. So I think work-life balance is something that we all need to work on. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. So this, again, is the regrets of dying patients. And during this pandemic, given that we have this opportunity to contemplate on death and dying, it's very important for us to think that, do we express how we feel? Do we do that? Are we afraid of it? Why are we afraid of it? What is stopping us from doing it? I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. So again, this is a dying patient's regret. And I have to say, during this pandemic, I actually actively put more effort into contacting with my friends, people that I thought I will meet eventually sometime down the track. I just kept in touch with them and check on them. And the last thing is, I wish that I had let myself to be happier. These are the regrets of dying patients. So as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, halfway through my recording today, the first recording, I was interrupted by work and I felt impacted by it. I was not able to continue my record, but revisit it after 3 hours later. So when I reflect on that now, I'm glad that the impact is not as big as it was earlier today. But this particular point always reminds me that the only person that can determine whether we are happy or not is actually ourselves. It's very, very important to really step back as often as we can to look at what is the big picture, because the big picture are the things that really matters to us, And when things are not the most important big picture thing, we do really need to constantly reflect, are we allowing that to impact us more than it needs to? So these are the top 5 regrets of dying patients, and it's the top 5 things that's good for us to reflect on during the pandemic. The next slide is something that this is the first time that I'm talking about the next one, not coming yet. I pretty much have to prep myself for that because it's actually about a friend who just passed away a few weeks ago. So it's John Flynn. So John passed away 2 weeks ago, and unfortunately, because it's during this pandemic period, only 20 people are allowed to go to his funeral on the 24th of April. I'm very lucky that I got permission from Irene and John's 2 daughters to share this with you. On John's funeral, first of all, a funeral of 20 people is really hard. I feel really privileged to have the opportunity to do that. So on the funeral, Irene wrote this most beautiful eulogy. And in there, she mentioned about the 5 points that John wrote down about what is important in life for him. So John has a long history of illness for the past 10 years, and this is something that he reflected on. So health and happiness for John is the most important thing, because as a patient, he will really know that when you don't have health, it's very hard to be happy. So this is something that we can do something about. Are we eating healthy? Are we living healthy? Are we doing things that's going to be contributing to our health? Wife and kids, family is the second important thing for John, which is demonstrated. He's a really, really loving person. The kids, the daughters love him to bits. Home and necessary assets, just necessary, nothing too ritzy. So we need to have the basics. So those are the things that we need. Work and community. So working, involving with the community, and then caring and sharing with your friends. So these are the important priorities of John. If we were to follow the previous slide, those are the good points to think about. What is your priority? What is important for you in life? And hopefully this pandemic has stopped you in your path of soldiering forward and gave you that time to reflect on what is really important. Because only through those reflections we can realize, have we lost our focus? Have we put something that is not on the top priority at the top priority and forget about what is really important? So this is the present that's from John. Hopefully it would help you in working out your priority of what's going on in life for you. So as a whole, what did I learn from being a thanatologist? What did I learn contemplating about death and dying? What did I learn through this pandemic? What I learned is early exploration and conversation of death and dying is important because life is impermanent. You do not know what is going to happen when. We can all try our best to make sure that things are normal, things are predictable. There is always this element of surprise. Hence, having those conversations is important. Paperwork should be dealt with. Whatever paperwork that you need to clarify, you need to put in place that is important when it comes to death and dying. Living at the present moment is essential. I was asked a question about death and dying about a week ago when I was doing another podcast. I said there's nothing more we can do but to try our best in every moment with a very relaxed approach. So trying your best doesn't mean that you're always uptight. You have to be relaxed, but you have to know that you've tried your best because the present moment is the only moment that we have. If you had tried your best at that present moment, and if you're not given any further opportunity, you have already cherished that. You made the best out of what you had. And yes, it's really sad that you do not have further opportunity. But when you reflect on it, what you had you had made the best out of it. I think that is very, very important. Constant reflection on these important things. Have we expressed enough gratitude? Have we said enough thank you? Have we apologized for things that we've done wholeheartedly? Have we expressed our love and affection to the people that matters to us? Are we able to gracefully say goodbye? As I look at the time now, it's 55 minutes and 48 seconds. So in 4 more minutes, this presentation will end and we will have to say goodbye. Of course, this is online. You might be able to click the play button and listen to it again, but you get what I'm trying to say. As prepared as you are, it can still be overwhelming. So just because, I've studied life and death studies, I'm a thanatologist, doesn't mean that disaster, impermanence does not impact me. They do. Because as prepared as you are, you could still be overwhelmed by things. But the important thing is if you have had resources in place, if you have had tools to help you to face those challenges, it just makes it a little bit more manageable. We all respond to things differently. This is very important to keep in mind too. As I mentioned, we are in the same storm, but not on the same boat. So please empathize with each other. Please cut people around you a bit of slack because we're all trying to manage the challenge in our own way. Surround yourself with support. So things that makes you feel good, people that makes you feel good, books, whatever that you can do that makes you feel supported, surround yourself with that. Remember yourself, what is the big picture, which is what we mentioned earlier. In the big scheme of things, what is the priority of your life? Look at the priority of John and consider your own priority. That is your big picture. Be gentle to yourself and each other's. We're in a very, very challenging time. That is really, really important. And share your experience, because I think that's the only way that we can grow as a community. So as a whole, this whole presentation of life, death, and pandemic is to talk about, through this pandemic, what do we learn? And what are the things that we can borrow from life and death studies that would allow you to reflect a bit deeper in this pandemic? And hopefully this talk has given you some ideas that you can then go and reflect on your own experience, consolidate that, use whatever way to allow yourself to reflect on it, and hopefully have some plans, because as we know now, we're on the way out. Hopefully by July, we will go back to normal. But I would like you to be somewhat a different person after this experience, that you'll be able to achieve things that you want to achieve. You know what is your priority, and you're brave enough to go after it. So I'd really like to thank you for your time. There's just another 1 minute left. Normally I receive Q&A. I give about 15 minutes of Q&A, but unfortunately this is a pre-recorded presentation. So if you have any questions, you can revisit some of the parts of the presentations. Otherwise, feel free to visit the temple. The reverends are there, resources are there. And as I said, as a Buddhist, I benefit greatly in the practice of Buddhism, which really helped me to manage impermanence and to allow me to develop my ability to empathize and be compassionate. So if you're interested, please feel free to visit us and to see, whatever that might work for you. And thank you again for your time and attention. So it's 59 minutes and 23 seconds. I will not be so anal to stop on the spot, so I would just stop maybe 30 seconds earlier. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.